Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption. And today, I'm down here with my son. And we're here at Foley Square to rally to keep the schools open. Schools are essential. So we missed the part where they were speaking and giving information, but we're here to show support. We're here to, hopefully we can talk to some parents, some students, maybe some other teachers that are down here, see what the vibes are. And you know, I'm definitely gonna give you my commentary in here as well. So make sure you smash that like button if you're new here. I love that beautiful face. Hit that subscribe button and that bell so you get notified every time I drop a video. And of course, share this video, right? We gotta spread this disruption all around the world, because right now what they're trying to do to our schools, it is unacceptable. So let's go ahead and see if we can talk to some people out here.
We need school, don't be a fool. Google Classroom isn't cool. Keep schools open. Keep schools open.
Hi, so my name is Mia. I'm one of the moms that started all of this. This is my daughter Alex. You know, we started this because we've seen how being back in school has transformed our kids' lives and brought some normalcy back to them. You know, what our kids went through throughout the spring, throughout the summer, was so difficult on these kids. And when they went back to school and my daughter went back to school, it was the best day of her life, because she gets to be with her friends, she gets to be with her teachers. When she's got a question, when there's something she doesn't understand in her school, she could just ask the teacher and the teacher can answer her.
Woo!
Right.
Raise it high, girl.
And being able to socialize with other kids, she goes to do a dual language school, to be able to learn another language by being fully immersed in it, to learn and make friends with kids who are different from her. That's why we have her in her school in the first place, and that's just something we can't replicate at home. Really confident in the safety of our schools because the kids are wearing their masks, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and there's so much testing going on in the schools, which we think is great, because it proves that our schools are safe. At my daughter's school, we had the random testing in the school. I think there were 79 people tested, 0 positives, because the schools are doing what they need to do. So when a couple of us moms heard the mayor start saying we're going to shut the schools down, after that very same mayor kept showing us we got to get our kids in school. There's no substitute for learning in a school, and our data shows we're what he called extraordinarily safe. We agree. Why are we going to torpedo the one thing that we all worked so hard to get started up again? You know, we applaud the mayor for having the courage to get us back in school when so many other big cities couldn't do that. He's got to keep that courage and keep our kids in school so long as it is safe to do so, and it's proven that it is. So right now, we're just a group of moms. We've got a petition going on change.org, Keep NYC Schools Open. We've got a Gmail address that people can reach out to, Keep NYC Schools Open @gmail.com. We've got the Facebook event Facebook page for this event, and we're going to hope that we can take off from here. This is just the beginning. A couple moms started this a couple days ago, and we're going to grow this from here, because there's 300,000 kids that rely on these schools going in person to school, and we're not going to stop until we've reached all of them. We've already got 8,000 of those parents with us.
Hey, can I say
Sure. Yes.
We need school. Don't be a fool. Google Classroom is not cool.
Hey!
Woo. So we came down here because we want to keep schools open as long as possible. We do feel like they're safe. We're happy with the precautions being taken. I work in healthcare, and so when COVID hit, I had to figure out what was going to happen with my kid in order for me to continue to go to work. And so both my kids were in a wreck, which were in schools, and it was terrifying as it was to put them in there. I got to see firsthand that schools can be safe with the precautions in place. And so when fall rolled around, I was happy to put my kids back in school. So I guess our priority as a whole is trying to continue to advocate to keep schools open with precautions in place, because kids really need school. You can take kids out of school and have them learn remotely for so long, but not forever, because at the end of the day, the disparities are going to grow. And you know, they really need the socialization and the great teachers teaching.
I am a special needs parent, and I've spent 8 months watching slow-mo regression, like unstoppable regression with kids that have been doing really well before this. I know that for my kids, the harm from not having school is far greater than the minimal risk in the schools. I mean, our schools with random testing of staff and students have a test positivity rate of less than 0.25%, which is absolutely ridiculous for shutdown in those circumstances. They're at far higher risk in whatever makeshift care arrangements people are going to make. I also work full-time as a primary breadwinner. We don't have a spare stay-home parent. We don't have a large enough home to have a separate distraction-free space for kids to do their schoolwork and log in, assuming they could do it without a para, which we don't have either. I mean, for us, remote school is just not school.
During the time that my toddler was home with me, I was actually on maternity leave, so in many respects, I was the most privileged out of anyone because most people do not have a stay-at-home parent who is literally not working, except that my apartment is practically it's so microscopic, it was completely unsuitable for this type of stay-at-home situation. Nonetheless, when she was not playing with her friends, when my toddler was not socializing, when she was so isolated, she ended up regressing, and she literally would go to sleep at 1 a.m. and she would not be potty trained. I mean, I felt it myself with a toddler who was not special needs. Now when I hear of stories of special needs kids, I can't even imagine what they are going through. This is all the more reason I am here.
Because if he did, he would make sure that I could be in school. So I can't learn at home. Remote learning is too hard. I mean, they have no
So to wrap things up, I'm going to say a few things from the teacher perspective, and then I'm going to bring in the international perspective and talk about what's going on over in Europe versus what's happening here. As a teacher, this right here, you know, if school buildings close, that means I'm home again like the spring with my son all day. And that makes my ability...
We have a new friend and we have to get to it.
Okay. That would mean I'm home with my son, and that greatly decreases the quality of instruction and feedback I'm able to provide because he's constantly competing for my attention. My spidey senses are tingling. So I think that's one aspect of the closing of schools that people are really failing to consider. You know, they're already giving teachers a hard time because online school is just not equivalent to in-person. It doesn't matter how high quality the instruction is. I mean, there are some students who prefer it, but that's the exception. Most kids, even my top students, are really struggling with it. I think this is something a lot of people don't consider, including teachers without kids. Many teachers have been advocating for buildings to continue to be closed, or in New York City, since we're hybrid, to close them down because it's unsafe for them. But at the same time, I've been hearing a lot of teachers starting to say what I would consider the quiet part out loud, saying that they actually love working from home. They hate online learning, don't get them wrong, but they love being able to roll out of bed in their pajamas and just, to me, first of all, like, read the room. Like, there's teachers out here going in every single day to support the most vulnerable students. And when I quote tweeted this saying, they're saying the quiet part out loud now. And Okay. Yo, I was watching this back, I'm editing it, and that could not have been a more well-timed and perfect reenactment of exactly what happened to me on Twitter. And I'll link in the description down below. You can let me know what you think. Apparently by they, I meant Black women specifically and not teachers, and then I got canceled. It was a whole thing. But that's another story for another day. And I don't want to rag on teachers too hard, but I can't help but to get that same feeling that I was getting near the end of the summer when I thought schools should be more preparing to open back up, have contingency plans, of course, have mitigation efforts, of course, and yet across the country, especially led by union efforts, we saw many, especially the biggest school districts with the most vulnerable populations and some of the neediest students, some of the widest learning gaps remaining in online learning. And teachers, they're out here, saying teaching saves lives, and yet saying that we're not essential. Schools are essential. And that's why I want to bring in this international perspective. There's an NPR article that just came out one day ago that really breaks it down and does a good, concise comparison of what's happening here, specifically in New York City, versus what's going on in Europe, where likewise the virus is raging all throughout the continent, and yet their kids are in schools except for some local and isolated closures. So here we are in NPR, lessons from Europe where cases are rising but schools are open. It's actually from November 13th, so 2 days ago. Today is the 15th. And we're going to read some sections from here. So Muhual Barv lives in Frankfurt, Germany with her husband, a son in first grade, and twin daughters in kindergarten. All 3 children are currently attending school full-time and in person. That's despite a coronavirus surge that has led Germany to shut down restaurants, bars, theaters, gyms, tattoo parlors, and brothels. And yes, those are legal in their country for November. Schools were allowed to remain open though, right? Setting those priorities, which is something here in New York City we kind of seem to be doing the opposite of. Despite the resurgence of the virus, Barv says her children's school's careful safety strategies have given her confidence. Each pod of kids goes to recess at 10-minute intervals, for example, so they don't mix in the hallway. When I see all the parents who are coming to pick up and drop off, they're wearing masks. The teachers are also wearing masks. They're doing their best to minimize risk. And as soon as something is detected, they're quarantining. Barb said everyone is doing their part. It's a little bit of choppy water, but if people are swimming in their own lanes, there's less likelihood of a disturbance. And I would say that's more or less what at least I'm experiencing as a teacher in the New York City schools. We have those mitigating efforts and protocols in place. People are wearing their masks. There's a lot of compliance there with that. We're coming up with different ways. One kid goes to the bathroom at a time. We have kids staying in the same rooms and not mixing out throughout the day. So those efforts have proven to be successful, not just now since school started, but we ran rec centers all spring. We can do this now. So continuing on, it says, across Europe, schools and childcare centers are staying open, even as much of the continent reports rising coronavirus cases, and even as many businesses and gathering places are shut or restricted. Countries such as France, the UK, Germany, and Italy appear to be following the emerging evidence that schools have not been major centers of transmission of the virus, especially for young children. And experts say these nations are also demonstrating a commitment to avoiding the worst impacts of the pandemic on children. And so for all this talk of the science, it doesn't seem like most people in the United States are actually, following the science. Not that there's one monolithic science, but the direction that a lot of the evidence is starting to point in. And we're, of course, completely leaving out that there could be any other impacts from shutdowns and lockdowns and not going to school. For children who have a very low risk, especially our young children, there are other long-term effects that could be very detrimental for the rest of their life. So we're going to get into that U.S. kind of approach now. The U.S. has taken a different approach as cases climb above 100,000 per day. There are very few places in the U.S. where classrooms have remained full, even as restaurants and bars are empty. In cities such as Boston and Washington, D.C., schools are remote, but indoor dining is allowed. Right? This week, Detroit announced it was closing its schools through January, while indoor dining and bars remain open at 50% capacity. Right? And again, there's not really wide evidence of spread, and the kids are the ones who are least affected by this. Meanwhile, in states like Florida and Texas, schools, along with most businesses, have stayed open even with very high and rising case rates. And again, I'm not arguing that every place in the United States should have the same exact policy. Right? I talked about federalism and how it is good to have some variation in different people trying out different things, and then, we can democratize the best approaches. But I think we're at that point where we have done a lot of that experimenting, and yet we're not seeing people actually taking advantage of the best practices that have been discovered. We're not seeing a lot of those targeted and localized shutdowns. It's just very general and very broad. Everybody's closed. So now we're going to go to more of that global perspective. So we have Andreas Schleicher, has a global view on education from his position in Paris, overseeing the PISA International Assessment Program at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. He says, while schools in Europe were initially closed out of an abundance of caution, research has shown that if you put social distancing protocols in place, school is actually quite a safe environment, certainly safer than having children running around outside of school. And this very much follows my own line of thinking. Back in March, I was one of the first people who was like, hold on, we should put a pause on this. We should figure out what this whole virus thing is. And then by May, June, I was sort of like, okay, we don't know everything, but we're starting to get some evidence in. It doesn't seem like kids are as greatly affected. And there's definitely a lot of like learning loss. Our most vulnerable kids are slipping through. We need to start figuring out how we can provide space and resources, in-person learning, at least as an option for the kids who like need and want it. And then he talks about the other part with the children running around outside of school. Again, this is something I don't think people are fully comprehending. When parents have to continue going to work or bringing income in, kids all of a sudden are going to be moving around maybe one day here, trying to put together some type of childcare to make up for the fact that they're not in school all day anymore. And now we're going to talk about those other impacts that I don't think people here in the United States are really getting, but in Europe, this report is saying people have understood fairly quickly how much damage school closures have done, particularly to disadvantaged learners. He says science especially favors opening elementary schools with young children, both less likely to spread the disease and less able to benefit from remote learning. I mean, my son is off the wall when he's around here, and he's the touch things, play things. Let's do science. Like, let's not. No, I'm just kidding. We do fun things all the time. And again, instead of that broad, like general, everybody's closed, they have localized closures based on number of cases. For example, at Bav's children's school in Germany, sometimes just a single pod of about 20 children and teachers will be sent home to quarantine because of a case. And in my school, we try to do that. We keep the kids, like we have the seniors, we have the juniors, like each grade has their own room or, 2-3 rooms, depending on how many kids are in the building on any given day. And I don't think I've ever been in a room that had more than like 5-6 kids in it. So we keep them nice and spread out, and we do this pod type thing. They go on here about how, again, there's not high rates of transmission, and it seems like it's not actually the kids who are spreading it. It would be the adults who bring it in, and maybe it spreads to a few kids, but it's mostly contained. And again, bringing up that whole point about 5-6 months ago, we didn't know what the heck we were dealing with, and we had to stop things for our kids' safety no matter what. And now there's a view that, yes, it's dangerous, but we know so much more about how to handle it. And again, we got to start, is the science like monolithic and definitive in every single way? No, but there are a lot of things out there that do seem to be working, and they're making it happen in Europe. They're making it happen other places here in the United States. And here in New York City, we really got to make this happen. We got to figure it out. Going on more about these unintended consequences of school closures and lockdowns that here in the United States, I just don't think are being considered by the mainstream. So other American observers are adamant that the United States ought to take a different calculation of society-wide impact of school closures, even when the virus spread is high. Demetrius Christakis, a pediatrician at Seattle's Children's Hospital and editor of JAMA Pediatrics, has just published a paper that estimates 5.53 million years of life could be lost as a result of school closures in the United States. This calculation is based on research showing that missing months of school lowers a child's chances of graduating from high school, lowers educational attainment, in turn is well established to lower life expectancy because people with less education are more likely to smoke, more likely to drink heavily, more likely to suffer from heart disease, and more likely to perform more hazardous work, among other reasons. So he says when you frame it in terms of school versus lives, it becomes a no-brainer, says Christakis. And everybody says, well, we can't send kids to school if it's going to cost lives. But in fact, not sending kids to school also costs lives. And we definitely need to take this into consideration. And then we have Lala Tanmoy Das. She is a doctor and a PhD student, and she she says, yes, this is true, and then brings in a little bit more perspective to it, which I think is also important. She points out the virus is far more dangerous for Black children, Latino children, and those with pre-existing conditions, and that we don't know enough about its long-term effects on children or adults to capture the full impacts on health. He also notes that many school districts in the U.S. have faced budget cuts that make it hard to do mitigation efforts or measures like regular disinfection or proper social distancing protocols in place. But he does agree with Christakis that schools shouldn't be closed preferentially over other restrictions, particularly for younger children. In New York, somehow restaurants and bars are open, but we're talking about closing schools. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I really like how the article ended off, really trying to show that full perspective and full story, that it's not just send kids back to school, the virus doesn't matter, school is more important. No, there's nuance here, right? It's not just full reopening with no mitigating measures, and it's not with the no realization that this disease doesn't impact everybody the same. All those things have to be taken into consideration. And that being said, one of my biggest problems with the whole messaging around COVID is very much focused on, we gotta lock down, we gotta isolate, and we gotta wait for the vaccine. There's nothing else we can do. And I haven't really heard anything about, vitamin D. Well, one of the reasons, and I'll link the study down below, but I found a few different studies on this, is that people with darker skin, so the Black people and the Latino people who she was referencing, also need more vitamin D. They produce less melanin naturally, and Americans in general have a vitamin D deficiency, and that nearly doubles for people, for Black people, because again, it's harder for them to produce melanin. And so I think it's particularly irresponsible to really just be pushing this whole lockdown, we're waiting for the vaccine, and not also encouraging people hey, take a look at vitamin D. This seems to be something that is very important to consider, especially in these communities they claim to care so much about. And then the other part of that is, just diet and exercise. We want to lock people down and keep people in the house. So many of my kids, they didn't go outside for months. And again, it goes back to, you got to get outside, get that exercise, that fresh air, and that vitamin D, that natural vitamin D. And there's so many scare tactics used instead of just being honest and really trusting people to have that nuanced discussion. So as of right now, on Sunday, November 15th in the morning, it's about 8:30. It seems like schools are going to remain open. Again, there's this whole de Blasio Cuomo dynamic going on. I made a bunch of videos on that. I don't think I can do it anymore. You know me, I'm going to continue to advocate for what I think is best for our students, but it doesn't look like this is going anywhere anytime soon, and we need your support. The kids need your support. Of course, I'm going to do updates on this channel here, but what you can do right now is you can sign the petition to keep schools open. I'll put the link in the description down below, and any other links to get in contact with the moms who started the rally. And as always, this is a conversation. I want to hear from you. Let me know in those comments down below, what's the deal going on in your district, in your state? What do you think about what's going on here in New York City? I think there's a tendency a lot of times when we don't agree with somebody to be oh, you're wrong, you're a bad person, you're awful, you shouldn't be a teacher. These hot takes that feels good, these dopamine dings. But I really want to have a productive and honest conversation about this. So again, let me know in those comments down below. If you haven't done all that good YouTube stuff, hit that like button for me. If you're new here, I love that beautiful face. It's my Sunday morning face. Hit that subscribe button and that bell so you can get notified every time I drop a video. And if you like this video, I'd appreciate if you could give it a share, because that's how we're going to spread this disruption all around the globe. And I know a lot of people apparently don't like this, that I like to have fun. Keep it light, keep it moving, keep it grooving. If we're not having fun, what we doing? And so that's why I got to leave you with, stay foolish, y'all.